Good evening. I hereby call to order the May 9th, 2016 council meeting, the City of Mayfield Heights. May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. DeJohn?
Here.
Mrs. Finney?
Here.
Mr. Mano?
Here.
Mr. Mercurio?
Here.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Here.
Mrs. Snyder?
Here.
Mrs. Tressie?
Here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll now move on to the acceptance of minutes of our last meeting of April 25th, 2016. I hope everyone's had the opportunity to review the minutes. Is there a motion to approve? Moved by Mrs. Snyder, seconded by Mr. Mercurio. Are there any suggested changes, amendments, or deletions to the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of approval of the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes of our council meeting of April 25th, 2016 have been approved as written. We'll next move on to correspondence and announcements. Does any member of council have something to share? Mrs. Sabetta?
Thank you, Madam President. The Chagrin River watershed correspondence I received was the April 2016 update. The upcoming training for stormwater professionals, strategies for increasing flood resiliency, Thursday, May 12th, 8:30 to 4, Pilla Center Room 101, Ursuline College, 2550 Lander Road in Pepper Pike. Floodplain administrators, planners, and building officials are asked to save the date for this training on strategies for increasing flood resiliency. Speakers will include Steve Ferryman, Ohio Emergency Management Agency, Matt Lesher and Dave McCallops from Stantec, Keely Davidson Bennett, Heather Elmer, and Christine Bucchieri from the Chagrin River watershed. A light lunch will be provided, and they are seeking approval for continuing education credits. I have forwarded this email to the service director, the planning chair, and the building director to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sabetta. Any other correspondence or announcements? Next, we will move on to reports of officers, and we will begin with our mayor, Mayor DeSico.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, and I want to thank everyone for being here. I hope all of the mothers in our community had a happy Mother's Day with a little extra gift brought to them by the Cavs sweep of the Hawks. Go Cavs. Looking forward to the next round. Use of our new recycling and trash carts began this week. The carts were delivered to all homes. Those who do not wish to use the carts can contact the service department at 442-2626, extension 235, after a period of 60 days to have them retrieved. And we've got a lot of great comments about the return of curbside recycling, so I think it's going to be a good thing. Recycling and Shredding Day was held this weekend. There was a continual flow of traffic throughout the event, and I appreciate the work done by my executive assistant, Renee Augustine, the service department personnel, and members of the auxiliary police unit to keep the event running smoothly. It really is amazing how many people, residents, participate in that. The Silver Social was held on Saturday, April 30th. All in attendance enjoyed music, dancing, and socializing, and the next event will be held on July 23rd from 6 to 9 p.m., so mark your calendars. And I want to thank the Parks and Recreation Department and the Senior Subcommittee members for their work on this event. The Cuyahoga County Board of Health has asked the public to help prevent mosquito breeding in our neighborhoods. Some of the best ways to do this is disposing of containers that collect water, tires, buckets, cans, flower pots, etc. Eliminate areas of stagnant water, repairing leaky outdoor faucets that leave puddles, emptying and refilling bird baths at least once a week, cleaning, draining, and covering pools or hot tubs if not in use, covering rain barrels and unclogging all gutters so that they drain properly, filling tree holes with tar or cement, and tightly screening all openings of your home. And one of the hardest things to do that they suggest, I think, is keeping children indoors during times of peak mosquito activity, which is 1 hour before, that's the easy one, and 1 hour after sunset. The public is also asked to help prevent personal exposure to mosquitoes by using insect repellents containing DEET or lemon eucalyptus oil and following label directions. The Cleveland Hearing and Speech Center provides hearing aids and assistive living listening devices to low-income qualified individuals at a reduced cost through funding from the Cuyahoga County Health and Human Services budget. Eligibility for the program is based on the completion of an application along with proof of income, and patients can be seen at one of 3 locations, and the nearest location to us is 4257 Mayfield Road in South Euclid. And interested parties should call 216-382-4520. And kind of piggybacking on what Mrs. Sabetta reminded us of our participation in the Chagrin River watershed, we do belong to 2 watersheds, and there's a lot of things that these watersheds could do for us. The Euclid Creek watershed offers Euclid Creek cleanup, hikes along the creek, rain barrel and green cleanup workshops, and instruction on how to use native plants and landscaping. And you can visit their website for more details. That's www.cuyahoga.swc.org/Euclid-Creek. And then the Chagrin River Watershed Partners offers free consultations and site visits to assist homeowners with backyard flooding and stormwater management, pond maintenance, and creating rain gardens. And their website is crwp.org/index.php/homeowners. I'm sure if you just go to their website, you can find that information. And lastly, in a matter that I believe is better suited for a private conversation rather than the council floor, the inquiry about Mayfield Heights Building Director Tom Jameson's part-time employment at Bratton Hall needs addressing. Since the subject was brought up in a public meeting, there could be a perception of impropriety, which is not fair to Mr. Jameson, the city of Bratton Hall, or to this administration. In speaking to Mayor LaCastro of Bratton Hall, he assured me that the position is very part-time, with most of the commitment being handled in the evening and on weekends. He has never seen Mr. Jameson using anything but his personal vehicle. So I just wanted to let everyone know that. And then also in response to some parking at Panini's issues that we've had, I think everyone needs to understand that the police department has limited ticket writing powers on private property, and fire lane violations and handicap parking violations are some of the things that they can deal with. The current situation there, really those cars cannot be ticketed by our police department. And I think the best way to handle it is, if you get calls about that, is to call the owner. I'm sure he would love to know that his people who would use his customers, customers who come to his center to frequent the businesses there, would love to know that, you know, they're having a problem, that he could resolve that problem. But we did speak to the owner, and the parking lot is going to be repaired, and that area needs to be repaved so the lines do not reappear after the seal coating has faded. And they're just waiting for a stretch of favorable weather to begin that process. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mayor. Are there any questions? Mr. Mano?
Since we brought this up already about this situation with the building department, I'm going to address it now, and I'm also going to address this Panini's parking thing. First of all, I don't appreciate getting a memo this late on something like this. I think that should have been part of our package. In reading,
Mr. Mano, do you have a question for the mayor at this point? So we're taking questions right now just for on the mayor's report.
all right, I'll save it till later.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the mayor? Let's move on to Director of Law, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. No report this evening.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Murphy? We'll move on to Director of Finance, Mr. Tribby.
I have no report either.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Tribby? Mr. Tribby, I just have one comment. I received an email from Josh Mandel's office, and he was just enlightening us into the fact that Ohio is #1 in ranking in the country. State of Ohio is #1 for government transparency, and it has to do with his Ohio checkbook issue. I'm wondering if you've ever done anything additional since
No,
Mr. Colston.
Not as yet, but we will look into it.
Okay, thank you.
We've never had a problem with being transparent here, so it's something we'll address, of course.
And I don't think it has anything to do with
Right.
our city ever being non-transparent. I think it's just something that they came up with in the state of Ohio, and I believe it was Josh Mandel who came up with the program.
Oh, yeah, I'm well aware of it. We'll have to see what's involved and what kind of work we have to do. I know they've offered to pay the cost, but we have to find out just what's involved in terms of working with our software people, too.
Okay. So I thought it was interesting that Ohio was #1 in ranking. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Tribby? Okay, we'll move on to our building committee, which is under reports, committees, commissions, and boards, and we will begin with Mr. DeJohn.
Thank you, Madam President. Tonight I'm introducing legislation that defines accessory use to businesses, and this legislation excludes recreation in our U4 district. This district includes almost all the retail stores up and down Mayfield Road, excluding Eastgate and Golden Gate shopping centers. The proposed legislation is to prevent undesirable recreation on Mayfield Road. Our current language is very gray and leaves it up to legislators to interpret it and decide what they think it means. This legislation will take the politics out of the decision of deciding what accessory use is on Mayfield Road in our U4 district. Some of you remember many years ago, Mayfield Heights had the giant slide on Mayfield Road, where Goodwill now stands. And the reason that Goodwill was, or the reason that giant slide was there is because recreation was permitted and not excluded on Mayfield Road. This legislation that I'm proposing will prevent this type of recreation, and the legislation will also prevent such things as playgrounds in front of McDonald's restaurant, volleyball courts in front of bars and taverns, sports bars like Panini's. And I'm sure you all agree that this legislation is needed to preserve Mayfield Road and Mayfield Heights as it relates to our master plan. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Are there any questions for Mr. DeJohn? We will next move on to Finance and Audit Committee. Mrs. Sabetta.
Thank you, Madam President. We had no meeting, and therefore I have no report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mrs. Sabetta? We will next move on to our Legislative Committee, and that's Mrs. Snyder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our committee has not met. I have no report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mrs. Snyder? We'll move on to Public Works and Services. Mr. Mercurio.
Thank you, Madam President. Over the past couple of weeks, our service department has been fairly busy. They've started to top dress the tree lawns and parks from damages from the snowplows over the winter. 26 trees have been planted that were requested by residents, and the service department will go ahead and take more requests starting in this fall. And Mr. Fenaro would also like to thank all those that were able to make it to the city's first annual Arbor Day celebration on April 29th, and you can view the tree that was planted out front in City Hall. On another note, Kimball started delivering their solid waste and recycling carts for the residents. This will be completed this week in time for the first week of curbside recycling pickup. Some residents may not want these carts, and we would like to remind them that they may opt out after 60 days, and they will be limited to having 2 bags of garbage. And if you would like to opt out, please go ahead and call the service department so they can take down your information. And I'd also like to remind everyone that the first week of recycling will start this week and will continue every other week. On a good note, the service department has received a grant from the Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District, and with this grant, they are going to create a magnet design that they're working on to be hand-delivered to the residents, and this magnet will feature a calendar of the weeks for which the recycling carts will be picked up. And we do have one item on tonight's agenda regarding bids for concrete, and we can address that as that comes up on the agenda. And that completes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Mercurio. Are there any questions for Mr. Mercurio?
Madam President?
Mayor?
Just a comment. Thanks for not yelling at me like Mr. Sharia did for stealing half of his report. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mercurio, I have a question.
Sure.
Will we be removing the large recycling bins that are on Marsal and putting that fence around that area soon?
Those will remain, and I can defer to the mayor about the fencing.
Yeah, there'll be 2 of them.
Right, there will
And
be 2.
the fencing is ordered.
And when the fencing arrives, we'll remove the others that are out there?
There's 3 right now.
Mhm.
I think
3 or
there's, when I
4?
drove by, I think there was only 3.
3,
He's
cutting them
whittling
back.
it down.
Oh,
Yes.
I see.
I
Okay.
don't think he wants to get them all out of there until, or go down to the 2 until we get the,
Fencing.
not only the fencing, but get the recycling cycle going. You know, people get used to it, so. But the fencing is ordered.
Thank you.
Just going to say the purchase order a purchase order was issued for the fence.
Wes, thank you.
And I think it also may be a good idea to hold out to see how many people actually do return those recyclable carts before we determine what we want to get rid of up at the community center.
I've received a few emails of individuals that are not happy having the carts. That, you know, they're large, and some residents were concerned about elderly people, not for themselves only, but for elderly people, and having to bring them to the curb. So as long as we still have the bins at the Marsal area, they should be fine. Next, we'll move on to Recreation and Parks Committee, and that's Mr. Mano.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The resident registration for 2016 is the last day for the early bird prices on pool passes. That'll be May 27th. Residents may come to the Park and Rec Department between 8:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday to receive the resident rate. Purchaser must show ID, current gas or electric, and if purchasing a family pass, birth certificates of minor children are needed. Interior Concepts by Lisa Morton will be held on Thursday, May 26th from noon to 1 at the Ross C. DeJohn Community Center. The cost is $5. Come join us to learn tips for finding balance in your life. Lisa Morton from Interior Concepts will present ideas including holistic interior design and feng shui. A light lunch will be provided. Pre-registration is required. Pickleball, May 23rd through September 2nd, Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 9:30 to 11 a.m. at the City Park Tennis Courts. The cost is $40. Pickleball was designed to be easy to learn and play whether you're 5 or 85 or somewhere in between. Pickleball is a racket sport which combines elements of badminton, tennis, and table tennis. Come learn this popular game and make some new friends. Pre-registration is required. Silver Shooters Bocce, June 15th through August 3rd from 11:15 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. It's $32 at the City Park Bocce Pavilion. Bocce ball really knows no age limit. It can be played and enjoyed by any ages. This is bocce aimed for those 60 plus. Play the great game of bocce under our beautiful pavilion. We will provide a simple lunch and a drink after the game. Lunch will be served at 12:30 p.m. or when 2 games are complete. Minimum of 16. More information, call the Park and Rec Department at 440-442-2627. My report.
Thank you, Mr. Mano. Are there any questions for Mr. Mano? We'll move on to Safety and Transportation Committee. Mrs. Finney.
Thank you, Madam President. I have no report this evening, but I wanted to mention that both our chiefs are here, Chief Bittner and Chief Elliott.
Welcome, gentlemen, and our department heads. It was nice of the mayor to invite all of you. I think this is the first meeting all of you've attended this year, at least all of you at the same time. Are there any questions for Mrs. Finney? We will move on to Board of Zoning Appeals. Mr. Mercurio.
Thank you, Madam President. Tomorrow night's scheduled meeting has been canceled due to lack of an agenda. That completes my report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Mercurio? We'll move on to our Planning Commission. Mr. DeJohn.
Thank you, Madam President. The Planning Commission met last Monday with 2 issues on the agenda. First issue was the redesign of the Winking Lizard, which is on our agenda tonight. When construction began on the Winking Lizard, they found that power lines were underground where the building was going to be built, and they had to redesign the building on the lot where it sits. The redesign plan was unanimously approved by the Planning Commission, and Mr. Hoffman is here tonight to discuss this a little bit further. Second item on our agenda was the revised fence ordinance. The commission had many questions and several suggestions. This is going back to committee, and that committee meeting is tomorrow night at 7 p.m.
Correction, it's not tomorrow night. Tomorrow night was canceled, and I have 3 new dates, Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday of next week. So let me know who can make those. Lisa can go ahead and get it in the paper, and I'll call Mr. Majeski, and we'll put that ad hoc together.
And thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. DeJohn? We will now move on to our public portion. Pursuant to Section 121.02, subsection H8 of the codified ordinance, each person will be allowed 5 minutes to speak with a maximum of 30 minutes for the entire public portion. Although this is not a time for public debate, it is your opportunity to address council with your concerns. Please note that there will be no personal attacks or comments allowed. Also, if you are here in connection with an agenda item, this is your opportunity to address council. If you would like to be heard this evening, please raise your hand and approach the podium, state your name and address for the record. It is now 7:27, and we will open the public portion. Is there anyone that would like to be heard? Mr. Hoffman?
Thank you, Mayor, Madam President, and members of council. I'm Andrew Hoffman, representing Cosmo Eastgate Limited, owner of Eastgate Shopping Center. My address is 30201 Aurora Road, Solon, Ohio. We are here tonight to ask for City Council's affirmation of the Planning Commission's unanimous approval, as Mr. DeJohn noted. Just one point of correction. We had not commenced construction. We were in the process of doing our civil engineering due diligence when we determined that there was a 5,000 volt line running not just under where the original footprint of the building was planned to be, but also that at points it was only 30 inches below the surface, and it would be charitably put unwise to build it over that line. And so the 2 options we had were to either relocate the line or change the orientation of the building, and the site plan that we have submitted that you are being asked to approve has actually turned the building 90 degrees. So instead of the rear of the building being parallel to the south setback of the property line, it's now being turned so that the entrance faces west, and the patio, which formerly was on the west side of the building, is now going to be on the north side of the building. And so the advantage of that is that not only is the patio farther away as the crow flies from Gates Mills Villa, it also is sheltered by the Winking Lizard building itself to provide further insulation, if you will, to the extent that there's any noise of any consequence that may be generated. And I've discussed that at great length at the Board of Zoning Appeals and before this council previously. So we're very comfortable that the change in orientation, in fact, is an improvement from the concerns that were expressed by members of the public at earlier meetings. What we've also done is added a new parking area immediately in front of the building with a concrete separation between our main driveway and the rear of the center, so that when all is said and done, we actually gain one parking space from this reorientation of the building. The reason why we chose this is because in working with First Energy, which would have been responsible for the relocation of the underground conduit, we determined that the time it would take for them to get to this work, given the fact that almost all of their resources are focused on downtown because of the Republican convention, would have put a 4 to 5 month delay in commencing construction, and neither we nor Winking Lizard wanted to wait that long. So we chose this option. First Energy has been very cooperative in the process, but they understood, and I understand the nature of priorities. So that's where we're here today. We are maintaining the 30-foot setback from the building edge to the southern property line. We will continue to have the landscape, the buffer landscaping that we've committed to do, and so other than that change, having said that, with the plans approved hopefully tonight by council, we'll get the revised shell construction plans to the building department. Hopefully those will be approved. We can bid them out and then proceed to construction, and hopefully we can have the building open before the end of the year. I'm happy to entertain any questions. Otherwise, thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Is there anyone else who would like to be heard this evening? It is now 7:32, and we will close our public portion. We will now move on to resolutions. We will begin with Resolution 2016-33. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Resolution number 2016-33, a resolution accepting a certain bid for concrete and declaring an emergency. Iapolo Concrete Corporation. First reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules? Moved by Mr. Mano, seconded by Mrs. Snyder. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mr. Mano?
Yes.
Mr. Mercurio?
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn?
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Yes.
Mrs. Spinney?
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Tressi?
Yes. Do I have a motion to approve? Moved by Mrs. Finney, seconded by Mr. Mercurio. We received a memo from Mr. Tribby and also a memo from our service director, Mr. Finaro, with an explanation regarding the bid cost from the two companies that bid the concrete. With the additional charges that would be incurred for additional stops and fuel surcharges, and possibly adding Saturday deliveries, Mr. Finaro believes it would be in the best interest of the city to pay the additional $4 per yard to Iapolo and forego the additional costs that would be attached to the Osborne bid. So the Iapolo bid was $114 a yard, Osborne $110, but that did not include all the additional fees on the Osborne bid. Is there any other question or comment regarding this bid? Roll call on the motion to approve.
Mr. DeJohn?
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Finney?
Yes.
Mr. Mercurio?
Yes.
Mr. Mano?
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Yes.
Mrs. Tressi?
Yes. Resolution 2016-33 has been approved. We will now move on to ordinances. We'll begin with ordinance 2016-17. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ordinance number 2016-17, an ordinance amending Chapter 1151 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Mayfield Heights titled General Provisions and Definitions by amending Section 1151.05. First reading.
Do I have a motion to place this ordinance on first reading? Moved by Mr. DeJohn, seconded by Mr. Mercurio. Roll call on the motion to place ordinance 2016-17 on first reading.
Mrs. Finney?
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Mano?
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn?
Yes.
Mr. Mercurio?
Yes.
Mrs. Tressi?
Yes. Ordinance 2016-17 has been placed on first reading. We'll move on to ordinance 2016-18. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ordinance number 2016-18, an ordinance amending Chapter 1171 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Mayfield Heights titled U4 Local Retail and Wholesale Districts by amending Section 1171.02. First reading.
Do I have a motion to place ordinance 2016-18 on first reading? Moved by Mr. DeJohn, seconded by Mrs. Sabetta. Roll call on the motion to place on first reading.
Mr. Mercurio?
Yes.
Mrs. Finney?
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn?
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Mano?
Yes.
Mrs. Tressi?
Yes. Ordinance 2016-18 has been placed on first reading. We will now move on to motions. Excuse me. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Motion to confirm the decision of the Planning Commission approving a revised final site plan for a new 7,400 square foot freestanding restaurant building for Winking Lizard at 1355 Som Center Road.
Do I have a motion to approve? Moved by Mrs. Snyder, seconded by Mrs. Finney. As we've heard from Mr. Hoffman, they changed the location of the building due to the electric lines. The drawing was revised. The direction of the building entrance now facing east. This item was unanimously approved at the Planning Commission. Mr. DeJohn, do you have anything to add? Roll call on the motion to approve.
Mrs. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn?
Yes.
Mr. Mano?
Yes.
Mr. Mercurio?
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Yes.
Mrs. Finney?
Yes.
Mrs. Tressi?
Yes. This motion has been carried. We will now move on to new business and comments from council. Mr. Mano.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I went through the parking ordinance for Mayfield Village, and their ordinance pretty much mirrors ours, with the exception of the last two lines. In it, it says, in a public or private parking lot in such a manner as to block the ingress or egress of any motor vehicle, and in a public or parking lot in such a manner that the vehicle would not be entirely within the limits of the space designated by marked lines on the surface. I would like to have those two lines inserted into our parking ordinance, which would allow the police department a little more latitude in parking lots such as Colony Square and others. And I think this should be done as quickly as possible, because we're getting into the season now with the bocce tournaments and all the different sports events going on, and that parking lot up there is a zoo. And every time I go in the bank or Giant Eagle, I get an earful from people. We gotta do something about that. And as far as the comment about the parking lot gonna be resurfaced and so on, do we have a time frame on that, or is that gonna be in October? Because that's when they did it last year. And I just think that this is a safety issue and should be addressed as such. And the property owner should see to it that crossover is clearly marked for people.
Mayor, do you have a comment? We will refer this legislation to our law director, who will review it and hopefully add those two sections to our ordinance. Correct, Mr. Murphy? Okay.
And while we're doing that, might as well give him this to add to that too.
Okay.
According to the memo, the situation with our building director, there's no ordinance to cover any of the situation. So I would like to proffer some ordinance, some legislation to be drawn up entitled dual employment legislation to ensure the integrity of public service and to reduce conflicts of interest, risks to public health and safety, and the abuse and waste of public resources. No non-union administrative department head shall engage in dual employment with any other municipal, county, or state employment agency while employed by the city of Mayfield Heights. The only exclusion in that is for the law director, because law directors typically do work for more than one city. So I would like Mr. Murphy to draw some legislation up for that too.
Okay, Mr. Murphy? That's going to your department. Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? Mrs. Sabetta?
Thank you, Madam President. Well, I'd like to say that I had the opportunity to go to the fire department training. And Chief, you are correct. There is no other way to do it than to sit there and watch it. I thought I was there for 10 minutes. I was there for an hour. It was the Hillcrest area, and they ran around the house doing different types of drills and skills and scenarios. Very interesting work, watching them work together and train, and to be on hand and train. And it's something that we forget when we think that though there aren't many fires in Mayfield Heights, there's fires all over, and they all have to get together and work and help each other out. And this was great, watching them work together. And the scenario with the smoke on the second floor, helping each other and possibly an injured person, was very interesting. So thank you for the invite. That concludes my comment.
Thank you, Mrs. Sabetta. Are there any other comments this evening or new business for council? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Moved by Mr. Mercurio, seconded by Mr. Dijon. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you, everyone. Our meeting is adjourned.